Hi everyone! We are now going to combine all the products we made in the previous videos to a coherent flying game in Godot. There would be a link to the first video in this series if you want to start from the beginning, and the link to my GitHub page if you want the final version. Let's get started. So in my Godog Fight simple repository, there are two branches. One is the master branch with all the code that we are going to write in this video, and the other is starting point. If you click it and then go to download the code, you are going to get a version of this project with just all the assets needed to follow along, but without all the code we're going to write right now. We will start by creating a new folder for our scene elements. We'll create the ground, which is going to be a mesh instance. It is going to be of type cube, and we're going to make it very large and very narrow. We're going to create a new spatial material with a texture. And now we're going to use the UV1 to scale it, but you can see we can't put the same value, otherwise we get some stretching. We need X and Y to have a ratio of 3 to 2. And now you can see we have the UV wrapped correctly. We're going to save it, and we're going to create another scene for some cube to add variation to our game. We're going to repeat the same stages with a different texture, and now you can see if I don't use the UV, I'd get the wall on only 1, but after I put 3 and 2 in the UV1, I get on each side of the cube the texture. Save it, and we're going to create a new scene, and it's going to be our main scene. So I'm going to go with the usual setup of main node, world, which is spatial, and one node for our scene so we can hide it and lock it very simply. So I'm adding the ground, I'm adding a bunch of cubes, and after I'll finish, I'm going to lock all the cubes in their positions and also the ground, so that I wouldn't click on them by mistake. Now we have our basic scene. We're going to start working on our event system. So I'm going to create an empty node script. I don't need a scene for it. I'm going to call it events, and we'll have the following events: one target destroyed, one for target locked, and it is going to return which target is locked on, and one that the target is released. I'm going to save it, and also I'm going to save the main scene, which I forgot to do a second ago. And now I'm going to set the main scene to be the scene that runs every time we press F5. And now we can start working on the plane. So we're having a spatial node called plane, a visualizer, which is going to have all the elements depicting our plane, two audio players for the engine and the jet itself, and a texture rec that is going to be used to display our Boresight. I'm going to turn off the jet for now, and we can start working on our plane. So play around with it a little bit until you are happy with the results. I made a very basic one. I'm going to make sure the jet is at the correct location, and I'm going to turn it off again. And now I'm going to start working on the gun. It is going to be an automatic gun. It is going to listen to inputs, and we'll have one fire action binded to the left mouse button. We need to create the bullet resource, so I'm going to do it now. I'm going to add a bullet. I'm going to give it lifetime of 2. I'm going to add a mesh, and I'm going to make it very small and very yellow so we can very easily see it, and I'm going to add some emission. I'm going to add a trail renderer. It's going to have the same size as the bullet and is going to keep the same width, and I'm going to also add some material to it so that we can see our bullet better. We will now add collision shape with the same width as our bullet, but we are going to make it very long to make sure we won't pass our target between two physics updates. We're going to save this bullet scene and we're going to add it to our gun. We will change the muzzle velocity and fire rate. We are going to make sure now that our machine gun sound is imported with the loop set to true, and we are going to add it to our gun. We can now add a camera and look at the current state of the scene to see that everything is working properly. We're going to save the plane scene. You can see we are shooting bullets, but as you can see the bullet is being affected by our physics, so we'll set gravity scale to 0 and friction to 0. Now the bullets fly straight. I want them to fly a little faster, so I'm going to increase the muzzle velocity. But you can play around with those values until you like the results. I think that is fine for now. I'm going to add some trail renderers to the wings to create some nice effect that would add a flare to our plane. I'm going to put it at 90 degrees on the z-axis, and I'm going to make it slightly narrower and shorter, and I'm going to set the width to stay the same. I'm going to add a custom shader material because I want them to fade away, so you can simply copy this code right here, and as you can see it's going to fade the trails as they get further away from the wing. I'm going to duplicate and create another trail at the other wing, and now we have some nice effect when we fly. We'll now add the engine sound and the jet sound to our plane. And now we can start working on the functionality. So we need two functions, one to set the jet to working and one to set it to off. And what they are going to do is simply turn on the emission. And for that we are going to cache the jet node and the jet sound node. And when we set the jet to on, we set the jet's emission to be true and the jet sound to be playing. And we're going to do the opposite in jet off. So we can simply copy and paste and change true to false. Now we want the Boresight to always point to where the plane is flying towards. So we are going to calculate the world aim position by taking our origin and removing the z basis times the aim distance. So we can aim at a certain distance. We can zero our sight to, let's say, 100. And we are now going to get our camera because we need to unproject this position to the viewport. So we are going to take our camera and use the unproject method. We are going to send it the world aim position, and we are going to remove half of the Boresight dimension. And the reason is, currently if we don't remove the half the Boresight dimension, we are going to draw the top left corner of our Boresight at the aim position, but we want the center of the Boresight to be at the aim position. So we calculate this value so we wouldn't have to do it every process iteration. And we're going to add the camera again. I deleted it by mistake before. And I'm going to get the camera for this scene. And now I can add the Boresight texture, and I can set it to scale and keep aspect centered so it will fit the side. And then I'm going to set the Boresight rect position to be the calculated value, and you can see it's working. We're now going to add 2 missile launchers to our plane. So I'm going to create a new scene called missile launcher and add an instance of missile. And I'm going to create a new script for our missile launcher. It is going to first cache the current missile. We're going to have a variable that keeps track of whether or not we have a missile loaded in our missile launcher. And we're going to create a function called fire, which gets a target, and the target is going to be of type spatial, and this will help us fire at moving targets. So we are going to call the fire function from our missile. We are going to create a reload timer and cache it, and a reload time which is going to set the amount of time it takes to get a new missile after one is shot, and after we fire we set the reload timer to run, and we connect the reload timer timeout signal to our reload function, which is simply going to be a function that instantiated a new missile, and save it as the current missile. So for that we're going to have another variable for our missile resource. It's going to be a packed scene, and we're going to preload it using our missile scene, and we're going to instantiate a new one and save it under the new current missile. We're going to edit. We're going to stop the reload timer. And we are going to set loaded to be true. So I'm going to add a spatial node, which is going to be where all our missile launcher is going to be child of. We are adding 2 missile launcher, 1 to each wing. And now we need to handle the functionality of firing a missile from our plane. So we're going to create a function called fire missile, and we're going to iterate over all the children of our missiles node. And the first missile launcher that is loaded, we are going to fire at the current target, and we're going to create functionality to get the current target right now. We're going to do it by having some target which is a spatial node, and if we have a target we are going to return it. Otherwise we are going to create a demi target, which is going to be a spatial node that is placed very far ahead of our plane, like 1,000 before our plane, and we are going to cache it. And if we don't have a target locked, we're going to simply return the demi target. And now we can fire at get target, which is always going to be a valid spatial node. Now we are going to handle the functionality. We want the missile to only explode when it hits a target, not the player and not the ground. So we are going to add a test for if the body or area we interact with is in group targets, only then you need to explode. We're now going to add a launch sound for our missile, and we are going to add the missile launch sound to it. And we are going to play this sound wherever we fire the missile. I need to add the onReady keyword here. And in our input function, we are now going to handle firing the missile. So we are going to have an action called fire missile. And whenever it's pressed, we're going to use the fire missile function. And I choose the right mouse button as being the fire missile button. And we can run to debug, and you can see that our missiles are being fired whenever I click the right mouse button. Now I need to change this small error in syntax, called the reload function, not the reload function. And you can see our missile is being fired and being reloaded. I'm now going to go to our missile scene, and the lifetime was pretty short, so I'm going to increase it to 5 seconds. And now our missiles are going to be able to fly further. So now we want to handle the locking and releasing of targets. So we're going to create two functions, target locked and target released. When we lock on a target, we are going to get a spatial node, and we are going to save it as our target. And when we release, we set the target to be null. We add an audio stream for the lock sound and add the lock sound after we make sure it is looping. And in our plane scene, we're going to play the locking sound whenever we are locking at a target and stop when we release the target. Now I want to also change the cursor whenever we are locking at a target. So I'm going to create a default cursor, which is going to be the steering cursor, and another one for locked cursor, which is going to be the locked target PNG. In my ready function, I am now going to set the custom mouse cursor to be our default cursor with hotspot of 1818, which is half of our image. And I'm going to, when locked, change to the locked cursor, and when released, change back to the default cursor. And you can see it's not working, and the reason is we need a resource, and the cursor shape should be 0 and not -1. So we'll change it. And now we have our custom cursors, and we can fire, we can shoot the missiles, and it's starting to look very nice. We would now want to start working on our plane flight. In our main scene, we're going to add a camera, and we're going to add to that camera child node that is our plane, and we are going to attach to the camera the plane control script, and we are going to change in our plane script from getting the camera to getting our parent, which is now a camera. And you can see that already by just doing that we are flying, but we want the plane to be slightly in front and below our camera. So in 2 viewport mode, I'm going to change the plane position a little bit to make it look the way I want it, and run it again, and you can see we do fly, but the entire parameters of our plane controller are wrong. So now is the time for you to play around with those parameters and make them fit the model you made. These are the parameters I found work nicely for my plane. You can see we get the nice flight. The trail renderer are not exactly at the edge of our wing, which is going to annoy me a lot, so I'm going to change it in a second. And I'm going to change the plane slightly to be more in front and below our camera. And the plane seems to fly and seems nice and responsive, and we get everything including firing and missiles. And you can see currently the missile is following our demi-target whenever we move. So let's fix the trail renderers and put them at the edge of the wing. And now I'm also seeing that the missile is slightly too close to the trail renderer, so I'm going to change that also. And this looks better. And I'm going to change the camera far variable so it wouldn't clip our ground. Now we can start working on our targets. So we have a hit sound, so we will add a new audio stream for it, and we are going to add a life variable for our target, and we are going to, if a bullet hit it, remove one life from our target, and if we reach 0 we are exploding. Otherwise we are going to play the hit sound. And now we are going to add the audio source for the hit sound. It's called impact. And we are going to add another audio stream for point up. This is going to play whenever we explode to let the user know he has a new point. And now in our script we are going to call the point sound to play whenever we explode the target. We're now going to go to our bullet scene and add it to a group called bullets. And in our target scene, if a body enters the area of the target and is of type bullets, we're going to hit the target. And whenever we explode, we are going to emit the signal target explodes, and for that we are going to autoload our events script, and we can now use it to emit signals globally to the entire project. We're now going to set the locking mechanism, so we're going to connect the signals of mouse entered and mouse exited to emit the signal target locked, and we're going to send ourselves as the target, and when we release the target we are also going to emit the target release signal, and we are going to connect both of those signals to our plane scene, and we are going to connect target locked to the function target locked and target released to the function target released. And this is going to handle our locking and releasing of targets. And we're going to add a new node to our main scene called targets, and we're going to add a script to it, and the script is going to randomly distribute a set number of points, and is going to be the targets are going to have y value of between 5 and 20, and they are going to have maximum distance of 50 from the target's center, and we're going to have 15 targets. So for each one we are going to randomly choose height, and we are going to randomly choose a location, and we're going to create a new target and set the location of that target to be the randomly chosen values. So to get that target resource we are preloading the target scene, and we are instantiating it and setting the translation of that new target to be the randomly generated one. And lastly we are going to edit. Now when you run the scene, you're going to see there are going to be 15 targets, and I can lock on them, but you can see they are not releasing properly, and we are getting this sound playing all the time. And the reason is I forgot to left out this self from the target released. We are not sending anything with that signal. So now we can lock on target, the missiles are being fired at them, and we can explode the targets. But I don't know if you caught that. When I flew into the target, the missile touched the target and the missile and the target explodes. So we don't want that to happen. So we are going to set the collision shape of our missile to be disabled by default. And only after we fire our missile, we are going to set the collision shape to be non-disabled, meaning it is going to register hits. And now I'm going to fly into some targets, and you can see our missiles are not exploding. Two last changes are releasing the target when it's destroyed and increasing the camera field of view, because we are still too close to the plane and I don't like that it's taking so much of the screen. So something like 100, and now you can see we can see much more of the targets and it feels nicer. To finish things off, we are going to add the turbo effect that we started working on in the beginning of this video. To our camera we are going to add a timer, and it is going to be the length of the turbo. In our camera script we are going to cache this timer. We're going to create a variable to keep track of whether or not the turbo is on. We're going to create two functions to set the turbo to on and to set the turbo to off. Whenever we start the turbo, we are going to take our model and we are going to call the jet on function, and we're going to do the opposite thing and call the jet off function of our model whenever we finish the turbo. Now, whenever we call the turbo action and we're not currently in turbo mode, we are going to call the jet on function. And in our ready function, we are going to connect the jet timer timeout signal to our turbo off function. And whenever the turbo is on, we're going to start the timer so that whenever the timer timeouts, we can stop the turbo functionality. We're going to play it, and you can see that, oh, I forgot to add the turbo action, so I'm going to set it to middle mouse button. Now when I press middle mouse button, you see the jet starts to work and we can hear the sound. Now we want to also move faster, so we're going to, in our move function, test if we are in turbo. We're going to multiply our velocity by the turbo modifier, and you can see we're flying so fast that our bullets seems to not go forward at all, so we are going to increase the bullet speed. And now if we play, we can see that our bullets are flying at an appropriate speed and the game is working fully. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed this series. I enjoyed making it, and I'm glad so many of you found it helpful. As always, all the code is in the description. Please leave any suggestions and questions you have in the comments and I will answer them. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day. Goodbye.